Hello, Pauliina. Welcome to our little channel. It's really great to have you. Maybe you can shortly tell us a little bit about yourself and how improvisation plays a role in your music making.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Pauliina Haustein. I'm a cellist, and as I often introduce myself, I used to be an entirely normal cellist. I was an entirely normal orchestral chamber music, solo repertoire playing cellist well into my 20s, into my late 20s. And I had dabbled in improvisation because when I was a teenager, I liked to play in bands or with my friends. And that was a nice side thing to do next to my very serious, very classical music studies at the Sibelius Academy. And I got married, and because of my husband's job, we moved to Los Angeles. And there, I felt that I was removed enough from the European and the Finnish very serious music making, and I was very inspired because the local musicians were, in my observations, much more versatile than we were. And so I took kind of my note. They could play pop music. I didn't realize that pop music for a string player is a genre until I saw the virtuoso players do that in a way that none of my Finnish or sort of European colleagues ever could. And so, inspired by all of that, I started to think, well, maybe I could bring a little bit of this improvisation into my recitals. And I was doing a recital tour of Central California, Southern California, and it felt like it was a situation where the pianist was open, and we started to do some small improvisations, which were harmonically very simplistic. We played the program, the big stuff, and virtuoso stuff, and then at the end we did this tiny little, and it was maybe like on dominant and tonic or something. But these moments consistently during that specific tour, they elicited a reaction from the audience that was entirely different than I had experienced, and it was emotionally so. And concert after concert, they would come to me in tears, and they say, "I don't know what you did at the end, but that was the part that made me cry, and I don't even know why." And the pianist and I kept looking at each other, and we thought, okay, then. But that was my first kind of merging of the two worlds that I had. And down the line, I was back in Finland a few years later. I came across Professor David Dolan from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, classical improvisation pioneer, pedagogue, and a few things led to another. And even though I was already fully employed in the orchestra, I had teaching positions, and I had the whole normal kind of thing. I was 29 years old, and he extended an invitation to come and do a performance doctorate on classical improvisation and reintegrating that skill set of improvising back into the concert hall, and that everything came together for me, and I decided that okay, I'm still going to make this change at this time. If not now, then when? And I have been pulled fully into the community of classical improvisation ever since, basically.
Wow, that's so great. And did you have any lessons about improvisation?
I participated in the courses that were available at the Sibelius Academy. The ones that were available to me, being in the classical side of things in the department of solo performance, they were. I think there were 2 or 3 courses that were more about creativity. One of them was led by an actor, and the other one by Erja Joukamo-Ampuja, who's a horn player, who's also a pioneer in bringing something of creativity and improvisation to Finland. And the horn world knows her because she's also revolutionized practicing on the horn quite immensely. So those things interestingly come together in her. And I had participated in the things that she had brought and taught, but that was really it. So there was I didn't do early music in that context. I didn't do early music improvisation or stylistic improvisation in the Baroque era. None of that really until I met David, and I participated in 2 of his master classes in which we did some snippets of a few different styles, but it's not focused on diving deep into one style, but rather ensemble and interaction with the audience and that sort of thing. So before, not really.
Are there any particular styles or approaches that, as a cellist, speak most to you?
There have been many at different times, depending on my own journey, because my journey, which is now visible in my doctoral thesis, and the 28 videos and 5 hours of material that go together with that, which you can find online, is very much the documentation of a process of taking this absolutely normal, traditional, non-improvising cellist and starting to integrate a skill set and a mentality as well, the improvisatory approach to what was there before the 1900s, before in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. So it's this merging and the journey of that merging, which is actually then my story, which is documented. And so for that, there are a number of different aspects. There's the role of the cello in the repertoire, very rarely playing alone, so you need to bring out another person. This is something that's very significant, I think, as well. I'm sure you know, as a melody instrumentalist, that most of the existing materials are keyboard based, and in those corners of the classical canon where improvisation has remained, it's keyboard centric in many ways. And so coming out of that, and also having access typically only to pianist teachers who have mapped out these pedagogies, that created an opportunity for me to really look through the eyes of not only a cellist, because the baseline also gives there's like an ease of bringing that in and bringing other people in, but also from a chamber music and orchestral point of view. And that's something where I'm now a year out of my doctorate. I'm starting to bring together my two lives and starting to actually think a lot about and look at a lot about how the skills that orchestral players have. There's a lot of intuitive knowledge and information that you gain just by playing in the orchestra. How actually I can, as an improvising pedagogue and somebody who wants to advocate for that creativity to come into the performance in the concert hall, how can we actually bring all of that together? And how might we utilize this knowledge that's already there, this really high intuitive, unwritten knowledge of orchestral musicians, and because it comes out of impulses and out of playing from each other's impulses on one hand, and on the other from knowing the same repertoire and knowing it so well that it goes on an intuitive level, and you can actually allow, when you enter this kind of place of listening, of active listening, the intuition starts to talk to each other, and some things happen, and you only afterwards you're like, how did that happen? How is that possible?
It's really fascinating. And do you then improvise with the orchestra, or is that not quite what you mean?
That's something that I'm hoping that will be happening in the near future. But it's as a former orchestra player, it's also very touching to see the hunger of especially of the tutti players to say, oh, hang on a minute, there could be something creative and something new where I can use the skills that we have, and it could, you know, I could do something that more resembles perhaps my training.
And how do you practice improvisation?
What I sort of, I'm starting to build my thinking and my playing around is more the building block, the compositional building blocks, and the forms and the structures and how they change and what are markers of different styles. And when I'm looking at improvising, I really love to do it in relationship with the repertoire. And by relationship, I mean, if I'm gonna, right now I'm practicing the Brahms sonata, the E minor sonata, and that means that in a concert context, I'll probably play the sonata as is, but follow with a personal reflection with the pianist. And that means that I'm practicing the scales and the arpeggios that are related to E minor and all of its friends and all of its neighbors, and jumping accordingly. So doing a very basic technical warm-up that's in relation to the figures that are a part of that repertoire. Practicing a little bit on the stuff that the pianist is doing, so that I have a readiness to imitate, I have a readiness to jump on board. So I love to use the material from something and then go from there into the approach. If I would be working with an ensemble where we have various levels of improvisation experience, then we would also be doing very basic stuff. By basic stuff, I mean practice theme, variations on a theme, going through the steps, how to make variations and according to the classical what's it called, the schema, and we would be practicing 1 minute ABAs and developing and creating themes and minorizing and ending and creating a big long crescendo, creating a big long diminuendo. So really isolating these kinds of elements and practicing them as separate skills before then bringing it together. So that's one approach. That's one way.
So, of course, as learning people, we always meet some hurdles on the way where you were kind of a bit stuck and then found some way to get over that. And how did that happen?
From a more foundational point of view, I would rather sort of say that the beginning, because as a cellist, I had no harmonic awareness. I was used to, as probably you as well, to always reading a single melody line, and not like as a teenager, the first time that I would even consider what the chords are underneath my line was in the first rehearsal, which was 3 days before the concert. So, and I would be like, oh, I'm out of tune. That's weird. Like offended that I'm out of tune because I hadn't figured out what the chord was underneath earlier than that, you know. So, and this is not unlike string players. I think in many ways, and the whole relationship to harmony and awareness of that. If you would have stopped me at any point of any repertoire for cello in the beginning and say, what chord are you playing now? What's its relation to the area of harmony? Where is it going? You know, all of these things. I would have absolutely no idea. And this is usually, in my experience, and I think that also of my professors, this is the first and the biggest hurdle, is that we've become so specialized in the way that instruments are being taught. If you compare to the historical model where accompanying or playing the piano was mandatory, and where violin and cello of the string instruments would be viewed as fully harmonic instruments that are actually creating the harmony for a melody or for a soloist or accompaniment, we've come extremely far from that, and those things are not really part of training anymore. And so that was my personal experience, very much, which I write about in my thesis. And now that I've transitioned to teaching others, it's the number one thing for every melody instrumentalist. But once you realize that, and once you realize how improvisation can actually help you with that, everything else, it's like an opening. And this opening has, in my case, led to the fact that if I was initially invited to teach a workshop to solo instrumental departments, and then they went to their theory teachers and they said this was the best. I now understood for the first time what music theory or harmony is trying to teach me. Can we please do this also in that context? And then compositional theory, and then analysis. And so now I've ended up teaching in every single department.
Could you say something about then your first step in this?
I was very diligently under the pedagogy of David Dolan, which meant he gave me a list, like a 10-point menu that I had to do exercises every day. And I did those exercises for every day for some years. For example, improvising a 2-line rule of the octave with yourself, which you can do with a piano if you need your mouth to be otherwise engaged, depending on your instrument. And then adding, and with voice leading and direction and changes. So sing and play, which he calls it, is one of the absolute core elements in his pedagogy. And then adding voices. So when you can do it with 2 voices easily on the spot within any key, then you add a 3rd voice. Double stops with the string instruments, or then on a piano you have one hand, and then you sing a 3rd one. So these kinds of things. And then for me personally, that was already quite an advanced place to start, which practice has led me now to being very fluent in that, and being able to modulate from any key to any key at any point, and not having perfect pitch, not at all, but being able to sort of find through the vertical, horizontal relations of the harmony, being able to sort of always find my way. So it was a huge process.
Can you speak a little bit about the challenges of improvising in an ensemble?
Well, first of all, to say that there is, I think, quite a famous quote coming out of the jazz world. It seems that the whole, the benefit and all the good things, basically, that we associate with improvising in a jazz context, they can be derived into the social aspect of overcoming the difficulty that comes when you add people. So overcoming the challenges of a group improvising together is actually what leads to that thing that we all love to witness and that we all love about jazz, for example. And this, I know from my stomach, my own experience, that we're quite used to. We're able in classical music, when we start from the paper, and everybody knows that's the key, those are the notes I'm supposed to play, that's what it's supposed to sound like, this is the rhythm that we're supposed to play. We always have a reference that's outside of the group and outside of the people to begin with. And when you start to improvise together, you don't. And so you have to create some set of area where you start to understand each other. And this, for classical musicians, as is now a part of my research, this is actually the self-criticism and the kind of negative feelings that come as we are trained in a certain way, or to avoid mistakes, that just comes out. And then if you don't like what you played, your body language turns negative, and then the people that you're playing with, they're like, oh, why do they not like what I played? And then there's this negative cycle that emerges. And actually, to overcome that and reverse that and do the exact opposite is exactly what leads to the best of outcomes, and leads to the kinds of outcomes where you can do something in concert where the atmosphere of the hall changes to the point where non-musicians who have no idea when they are playing written music and when they're improvising, they were able to indicate, as part of my audience research, when the improvisation started, because the emotional atmosphere changed in the room. And this problem, so-called problem solving in real time, that then occurs with the improvising ensemble, that is not hidden in the practice room. Like, this is what musicologists used to say, that, oh, improvising is absolutely a part of classical music. It just happens in the practice room where they're figuring out how to do it. Which is, of course, nonsense, as we know music history, But we allow that process, that creative problem solving, to happen on stage, because we meet it with our artistry and with the musicality and all the skill that we've acquired individually and together. And that is something that opens the situation. The ones who are witnessing that, they're no longer witnessing it or testify looking from behind, looking from far away, an aquarium, but it opens the space. And that makes the emotional impact on the situation. And it's a different kind of experience. It's a different aesthetic type of musical experience that we're offering. And it's not different from the repertoire. It's a part of the whole thing. It's a conversation of that which has been written and which we all love, to that which is being written right now and is just coming out of our personalities. And allowing that to happen. So when the end result is that, and having experienced these moments with the audience many times, the challenges of the beginning and of finding a way to bring these self-critical, self-analytical, very much in our heads classical musician types together to make a process that opens up our ears and opens up also our emotional attitudes to the music, it's just worth it. And that's just what I do, is I'm creating pathways that make that process as easy and fun as possible, basically.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you, which are two questions?
Oh, there's one aspect that I would sort of mention as something to also think about in this, because it was part of this integration process that came out of my research, which was that, as through the concerts and the preparation and then all of the research side of it, the data side, we were able to see and show that when it's not only the audience who notices the difference between improvising and not improvising, but actually in the musician, something really changes. It changes in the body, it changes in the breathing, it changes in the way that we have become aware. So it's not only the listening and the active active listening and reacting in the moment, but it's not like you would intuitively maybe think that you become just more alert. But it wasn't only that. Actually, in the more alertness, we became more centered and more ground. And in the concerts, when you watch them and you analyze them, you can see that there's actually a surprising correlation, that in the moments of improvising, as I wrote in my thesis, and I observed that you actually felt more insecure, but you commanded more security and a deeper musical long sense and a longer phrase structure and a deeper breathing in the moments of improvising. And this is, of course, this is not what we expect in a way. You would expect that you just become more faster and more alert and more agitated, but actually you connected to the opposite. You became like I have to unfortunately say, in the first concerts before I targeted that and started working on it, my highest musical moments of breathing and of musical phrasing and technical fluency occurred during the improvisations, even though it was something based on a repertoire. So I was playing the repertoire better when I thought I was improvising than when I was actually playing the repertoire, which is very disheartening at first. And David had seen it for a couple of decades, so he wasn't disheartened. And that, so chasing that line, I'm at the place where I like to quite provocatively ask, if a composer asks, who is used to musicians improvising, if he asks you to play like you would be improvising, do you know what that means? And to close this provocative sort of idea with a wonderful example, we have these performers who are phenomenal improvisers. For example, the Finnish violinist Pekka Kuusisto. And I've heard him do many things. And quite recently, I heard him play a Tchaikovsky violin concerto, where the cadenza was that was one of, I hadn't heard that in a long time, and his cadenza was so convincingly improvisatory that I was not. I was like, is that really what he wrote? Like, my brain was frying because I was trying to decide if this is what Tchaikovsky wrote or what Pekka is improvising and has played a million times in his life, maybe more. And I had to go and give him a huge hug afterwards because I was so happy about this experience that I really had trouble telling him. And so a master improviser can do something like this, something where that's a completely mind-blowing experience to a seasoned classical listener, through offering this spirit of exploration and discovery so authentically. So that's something that I would happily close my provocative question with, that maybe we should all be learning a few things.